In a world of chaos, there is only one thing you can control: your mind.
The moment everything shifts. There's a moment that comes in everyone's life, usually when you least expect it, where you're standing at the edge of something. Maybe it's a decision that terrifies you. Maybe it's a failure that just happened. Maybe it's someone telling you that you're not enough. And in that moment, something inside you breaks. Not physically, but spiritually. Your will fractures. Your confidence collapses. You feel this weight settle in your chest, and a voice whispers, "You can't do this. You're not built for this. Maybe you should just stop." I want you to close your eyes for a second and remember that feeling. Not to torture yourself, but to acknowledge it, because that feeling is the gateway to everything we're about to explore. Now I want you to think about someone else, someone you know, maybe someone you admire, maybe someone you secretly envy. Someone who, when faced with the exact same situation, didn't break, didn't fracture, didn't listen to that voice. Instead, they looked at the obstacle and something in their eyes changed. They got quieter, more focused, like they were suddenly seeing a world that nobody else could see, and they pushed through. What was different about them? Was it genetics? Did they have a different brain? Were they just born unbreakable? Here's what nobody wants to hear because it destroys their excuses. It wasn't born. It was built. That person didn't have a superhero gene. They had a framework, a way of thinking, a lens through which they filtered every adversity, every rejection, every setback. And that lens transformed obstacles from problems into invitations. The Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, they didn't accidentally become undefeatable. They engineered it. They reverse-engineered their own minds. They built mental architecture so solid that nothing from the outside could penetrate it. And here's the insane part. That architecture can be installed into your mind right now, today. Not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, but today, in this moment, you can begin building the mindset that makes you literally impossible to break. Not because you won't face pain, you will. Not because you won't experience loss, you will. But because the way you relate to that pain will change completely. And when your relationship to pain changes, everything changes. So I'm asking you something crucial right now. Are you willing to question everything you believe about why people succeed or fail? Are you ready to demolish your old thinking and rebuild something stronger? Are you brave enough to discover that you're already more resilient than you ever gave yourself credit for? Because if the answer is yes, then what we're about to explore will fundamentally rewire your entire existence. Let's begin. Part 1. The invisible prison. What's actually controlling your life? Here's something I want you to feel in your gut. Most of your suffering isn't coming from what's actually happening to you. It's coming from what you think is happening to you. Let me make this visceral. Imagine you're walking home at night. You're alone on a dark street. Suddenly, you hear footsteps behind you. Your heart immediately starts racing. Your palms get sweaty. Your mind floods with terrifying scenarios. Someone's following me. They're going to attack me. I'm in danger. Your body is in full panic mode. Then the footsteps get closer. You turn around. It's a woman with headphones, jogging past you, completely unaware you exist. And instantly, your fear dissolves. But here's the mind-bending part. Nothing physically changed. The footsteps were always innocent. The woman was always just jogging. The threat was never real. So what was causing your terror?
not reality, but your interpretation of reality. This is the invisible prison that keeps most people enslaved. They're not in actual chains. The chains are in their minds. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who was literally enslaved, and I mean actually enslaved, tortured, brutalized, he said something that should shake you. No man is free who is not master of himself. Freedom is not procured by a full enjoyment of what is desired, but by controlling the desire itself. And he said this as a slave, as someone whose body was owned by another person. His body was imprisoned, but his mind was free. Because he understood something that most free people will never understand. The external circumstances are almost irrelevant. The only prison that matters is the one in your thinking. Think about it. You have freedom that emperors in ancient times would have killed for. You can go anywhere. You can read anything. You can learn from the greatest minds that ever lived instantly through your phone. And yet, many of you are miserable, anxious, stuck. Why? Because you're imprisoned by something invisible. You're thinking. You're imprisoned by thoughts like, I'm not good enough. People are judging me. I'm going to fail. The world is against me. I don't deserve success. I'm too old, young, poor, broken. These thoughts are not facts. They're interpretations. They're stories your mind is telling, and you believe them like they're objective truth. But they're not. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of the entire Roman Empire, a man with literally infinite power, he understood this too deeply. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Note what he said. He didn't say you have power over what happens to you. He said you have power over your mind. Because he knew something profound. What happens to you is rarely in your control. But how you relate to what happens, that's completely, absolutely 100% in your control. Here's where most people's entire worldview collapses. You've been taught to believe that your emotions happen to you, that when you feel anxious, it's because something triggered your anxiety, that when you feel depressed, it's because circumstances are depressing. But that's backwards. Your emotions don't happen to you. Your emotions happen through you, through the lens of your thoughts, your interpretations, your stories. Let me prove this to you. 2 people get rejected for a job. Person A thinks, I'm clearly not qualified. I'm never going to be good enough for a position like that. Maybe I should just accept a lower level job. This proves that I'm not as talented as I thought. Person B thinks, interesting. They clearly needed someone with a different skill set. That's information I can use. I'll develop that skill and apply again. Or I'll find an organization where my current skills are a better fit. Either way, I'm learning. Same event. Completely different thoughts. Completely different emotional responses. Completely different futures. Person A will spiral into depression, apply for fewer jobs, interview with less confidence, and often doesn't get hired. Person B will stay motivated, apply for more jobs, interview with confidence, and often does get hired. So the question becomes, who controls your thoughts? Most people will say, well, my thoughts just happen. I can't control them. But that's the lie that keeps you enslaved. You absolutely can control your thoughts. Not in the moment. The initial thought might arise automatically. But what you do with that thought, that's completely yours. When a fearful thought appears, you can believe it immediately and act as if it's true. You can question it. You can examine it. You can challenge it. You can replace it with something more accurate. Most people do the first one. They believe every thought that appears, and then they wonder why they're so anxious. But the Stoic does something different. The Stoic observes the thought without being consumed by it. Seneca explained this beautifully. It is not the things themselves that disturb people, but their judgments about those things. Notice he said judgments, not the things. The outer world is what it is, but your judgment about the outer world, that's where your power lies. Here's the revolutionary insight that changes everything. The moment you realize that your suffering comes from your interpretation, not from reality, you've already taken the first step towards freedom. Because if your interpretation is causing the suffering, then changing your interpretation will end the suffering. And that interpretation is completely within your control.
Part 3. The alchemy of adversity. Turning pain into power. There's something profoundly counterintuitive about the undefeatable mindset. It doesn't fear adversity. It hungers for it. I know that sounds insane, but stay with me because this is where everything clicks. Think about how a muscle grows. It doesn't grow when you're resting, it grows when you're stressing it. When you're lifting weight that's just barely beyond your current capacity. The same principle applies to your mind, your character, your resilience. The undefeatable person understands something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Adversity isn't the enemy. Adversity is the teacher. And the question isn't, how do I avoid adversity? It's, how do I learn from adversity? Let me tell you about someone who understood this so deeply that he became arguably the greatest philosopher who ever lived. Seneca was born into wealth and power. He had slaves, estates, influence. He could have lived a life of pure comfort and luxury, but he didn't. He deliberately practiced hardship. He would wear rough clothes, sleep on a hard bed, eat simple food. And he would ask himself, is this the condition I feared? Why would a wealthy man deliberately make himself uncomfortable? Because he understood that comfort is the enemy of resilience. The more comfortable you become, the more fragile you become. Every luxury you depend on is a potential weakness. Every comfort you can't live without is a chain. But if you deliberately practice discomfort, if you voluntarily do hard things, then when real adversity comes, you're already prepared. Seneca wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days every month in which you will be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself, the while, is this the condition that I feared?" He was inoculating himself against fear, against fragility, against the terror of losing comfort. Here's what most people never understand. The person who's never suffered, who's had everything easy, who's never had to push through adversity, that person is fragile. They shatter when the first real challenge arrives. But the person who's voluntarily endured hardship, they're strong. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because they've built evidence that they can survive it. Let me give you a contemporary example. There's a woman named Jessica. She grew up privileged. Everything came easily. She never had to work hard for anything. At 25, she gets her first real rejection. Someone doesn't love her back. She spirals. She feels like her life is over. She can't function. But there's another woman, Marcus. He grew up poor. He had to work while going to school. He failed the first time he tried to start a business. He dated someone for 5 years and got heartbroken. By the time he faces rejection, it's not new. He knows he can survive it. He knows he can rebuild. Same event, completely different response. Why? Because Jessica had been cushioned. She'd never built resilience. But Marcus had been forged. Adversity had shaped him. The undefeatable mind therefore asks, where can I deliberately practice adversity? Where can I voluntarily do hard things so that when real adversity comes, I'm prepared? Some people do this through exercise, pushing their bodies to their limits. Some people do this through creativity, doing hard, creative work that stretches them. Some people do this through helping others, doing difficult, unrewarding work that builds character. Some people do this through fasting or going without luxuries. The specific form doesn't matter. What matters is the principle.
Voluntary discomfort builds resilience. Marcus Aurelius understood this as emperor. He had endless power, but he would remind himself of reality. He would meditate on loss, on failure, on death, not to be morbid, but to be prepared. He wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." He's saying, the obstacle isn't blocking your path. The obstacle is the path. Every difficulty is an opportunity to become stronger. Every setback is an invitation to build character. Every failure is a lesson that success without struggle cannot teach. Here's the practice that will transform your relationship with difficulty. Next time something hard happens, you fail at something, you face rejection, you experience loss, pause. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" ask, "What is this trying to teach me? How is this making me stronger? What character is this building in me?" Not as a way to deny the pain, but as a way to extract the wisdom from the pain. Because there is wisdom in every adversity, but only if you're willing to look for it.
Part 4. The surrender that makes you powerful. Acceptance. There's a moment in most people's lives when they realize that they cannot control what's happening to them. Maybe it's a diagnosis. Maybe it's a loss. Maybe it's an injustice. Maybe it's simply that life isn't turning out the way they planned. And in that moment, something inside them rebels. They fight. They rage. They deny. They ask, "Why me?" over and over again. And that's human. That's natural. That's okay. But it's also the source of endless suffering. Because there's a paradoxical truth that very few people ever discover. The moment you accept what you cannot change, you become free. Not free from the pain, but free from the resistance to the pain. And that resistance is what multiplies the suffering. Let me explain this in a way that will make you feel it in your bones. Imagine you're underwater and you're panicking. You're struggling against the water, thrashing, trying to fight your way to the surface. And the more you struggle, the more exhausted you become. But if you stop struggling, if you accept the water, if you relax into it, something shifts. Your buoyancy becomes apparent. Your energy is conserved. You can actually navigate more effectively. Most people spend their entire lives struggling against reality. Reality is what it is, but they wish it were different. They resist it. They fight it. They hate it. And that resistance is exhausting. It's the source of their depression, their anxiety, their sense of powerlessness. But the Stoic does something different. The Stoic accepts reality as it is, not as they wish it to be. Epictetus, who I keep coming back to because his wisdom is so piercing, said this: "There is only one way to happiness, and that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the control of our will." And he said this as a person who had actually experienced the worst things. He was tortured. His leg was broken by a master. He was enslaved. And yet, from that place of ultimate suffering, he discovered that happiness was possible, not because his circumstances changed, but because he stopped fighting against his circumstances. Let me give you a modern example. There's a man named David. He had a career mapped out. He was going to be a corporate executive. He worked toward that for 10 years. Then the company collapsed. Not because of anything he did, just market forces, bad timing, bad luck. He spiraled. For months, he was angry. He was bitter. He asked, "Why?" over and over again. He resisted the reality. This shouldn't have happened.
But resisting it didn't change it. It only made him miserable. Then something shifted. He realized, this happened. I cannot change the past. The company is gone. My plan is gone. So what can I do now? And the moment he accepted the loss, not as something good, but as reality, everything changed. He looked around. He had skills. He had experience. He had resilience. He had time. And with that acceptance came clarity. He wasn't stuck in bitterness anymore. He could actually think strategically. He ended up starting his own business, which, ironically, he loved far more than the corporate path would have provided. But it only became possible the moment he accepted what he couldn't change. Here's the profound wisdom. Acceptance isn't resignation. It's not giving up. It's realism. Seneca said, "True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future, not to amuse ourselves with either hopes or fears, but to rest satisfied with what we have, which is plenty. For he that is so wants nothing." He's saying, the only moment you have is now. And if you're constantly fighting against what's happening now, wishing the past were different or fearing the future, you're missing the only life you've got. The practice here is called amor fati, love of fate. It means accept what has happened, not because it's good, but because it is. And then ask, given that this is reality, what's the best move forward? Here's how to practice this. Think of something that happened that you're still angry or bitter about. Something you wish hadn't happened. Now ask yourself, can I change the past? The answer is always no. Now ask, given that I cannot change the past, what's the best way forward? This question immediately shifts you from victim mode, I'm stuck, to agent mode, I have choices. And that shift is the moment you reclaim your power.
Part 5. The Magic of Perspective. Reframing the unframable. Here's something that most people don't realize. The same situation can be interpreted in infinite different ways. And your interpretation determines everything. Your emotional response, your motivation, your behavior, your future. Most people think their interpretation is objective reality. It's not. It's a choice. And the undefeatable mind knows this. Let me give you examples that will break open your thinking. You apply for a job. You don't get it. Interpretation A. I'm not good enough. The world doesn't want me. This proves I should just accept a mediocre life. Interpretation B. That job wasn't the right fit. I learned something about what they're looking for. I can use that to improve my next application. Same event. Completely different interpretations. The first leads to depression. The second leads to growth. Someone criticizes your work. Interpretation A. They hate me. I'm terrible. I should never share my work again. Interpretation B. They've identified something I can improve. Free feedback. I'm going to use this. Same event, completely different interpretations. The first leads to shame. The second leads to mastery. You experience a health issue. Interpretation A. This is a disaster. My life is ruined. I'm falling apart. Interpretation B. My body is telling me something. I need to pay attention. This is an opportunity to actually care for myself. Same event, different interpretation, completely different experience. Marcus Aurelius understood this so deeply. He wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself,
but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. He's saying the event is neutral, but your estimate, your interpretation, can be chosen. And the moment you realize you can choose your interpretation, you've reclaimed your power. Let me tell you a story about this that will make it real. There was a man named Thomas who was a perfectionist. Everything had to be exactly right, and he suffered constantly because nothing ever was. One day, everything in his life fell apart at once. His business failed, his relationship ended, his health struggled, and something shifted in him. He realized, I've been suffering because I've been interpreting everything through the lens of perfectionism. Everything has to be perfect or it's a failure. But what if he interpreted it differently? What if failure is just feedback? What if endings are just beginnings? What if struggle is just growth? The moment he changed his interpretation of these events, his suffering didn't disappear, but it transformed into something useful. It became fuel for learning and rebuilding. Same events, different interpretation, completely different experience. Here's the practice that will revolutionize your thinking. Take something that's troubling you, something you're interpreting negatively. Now, write down your current interpretation. Then ask, is there another way to interpret this? Could this be an opportunity instead of a disaster? Could this be feedback instead of rejection? Could this be redirection instead of failure? Write down 3 to 5 alternative interpretations. Don't force yourself to believe them, just consider them. And notice how your emotional response shifts as you consider different interpretations. The point is, your interpretation isn't set in stone. It's a choice, and you can choose again right now. Seneca said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Most of your suffering isn't from what's actually happening. It's from the story you're telling about what's happening. But the undefeatable mind is aware of the story, and it can edit the story.
Part 6. Purpose, the force that makes you unbreakable. Here's something that will sound strange until you feel it. The moment you stop fighting for yourself and start fighting for something bigger than yourself, you become undefeatable. Not because you become superhuman, but because something shifts in your why. And a strong enough why can endure almost any how. Think about a parent protecting their child. That parent will do things they never thought possible. They'll run into burning buildings. They'll stand against armies. They'll go without food. Why? Because they're not fighting for themselves. They're fighting for something sacred. Now, you might not have children, but the principle still applies. Every undefeatable person has a why, something they believe in so deeply that they'll endure any difficulty to pursue it. Marcus Aurelius didn't rule Rome for Marcus. He ruled Rome because he believed he had a duty. He believed he had a responsibility to serve something greater than himself. And that purpose kept him going through endless conspiracies, betrayals, wars, and plagues. Seneca didn't write philosophy for himself. He wrote it because he believed he had something to teach, something to contribute. He believed his gift was meant to help others. And that purpose gave him strength. The undefeatable person asks, what do I believe in so deeply that I'd be willing to suffer for it? Not what makes me happy. That's too small. Not what makes me money. That's too empty. But what do I believe in so deeply that I'd be willing to suffer for it? Let me tell you a story that will make this visceral.
There's a woman named Angela. Her life was falling apart. She was depressed, directionless, broken. Then she started volunteering at a homeless shelter. And something shifted. She realized that these people, many of them told they were worthless, helpless, hopeless, they just needed one person to believe in them. And she was that person. Suddenly, her own pain didn't matter anymore. Not because it disappeared, but because she had a purpose bigger than her pain. She had people depending on her. She had a reason to get up every morning that was larger than her own happiness. Her depression didn't vanish, but it became manageable because she was no longer obsessing about her own suffering. She was focused on something outside herself. And in focusing outside herself, she paradoxically healed herself. This is the secret that most people never discover. Happiness comes not from getting what you want. It comes from wanting something worth working for. Purpose is the fuel that powers the undefeatable mindset. Epictetus said, "No one is truly free who is not doing what they were meant to do." You were meant for something. Not something grand necessarily, but something. Maybe you were meant to be the best parent you could be. Maybe you were meant to create something that helps people. Maybe you were meant to build a business that provides jobs and dignity. Maybe you were meant to be a friend who shows up for people. Maybe you were meant to be a healer, a teacher, a builder, a creator. The practice is this. Ask yourself, if I knew I couldn't fail, if I knew I would get whatever I worked for, what would I pursue? The answer to that question is often your purpose. Now ask, am I currently pursuing it? If no, ask, what would it take for me to start? Because the moment you align your daily actions with a purpose bigger than yourself, something magical happens. Difficulty becomes bearable because it's in service of something meaningful. Failure becomes acceptable because it's a step towards something that matters. Suffering becomes purposeful because it's building something that will outlast the suffering.
Part 7. The discipline that liberates. Paradox unveiled. Here's something that will sound backwards until you live it. Discipline is freedom. Most people think discipline is the enemy. They think it constrains them, it limits them, it prevents them from being themselves. But that's a fundamental misunderstanding. The undisciplined person is not free. They're a slave. They're a slave to their impulses. Every craving they obey, every emotion they act on, every distraction they follow. They tell themselves they're free because they do whatever they want. But is that freedom? Doing whatever you want? Or is that slavery to your wants? The disciplined person, on the other hand, is truly free. Why? Because they can direct their own energy. They can postpone gratification. They can choose what matters most. They're not controlled by impulses. They control their impulses. Seneca understood this profoundly. He was enormously wealthy. He could have done anything, but he chose discipline. He chose routines. He chose structure. Why? Because he knew that discipline was what gave him real freedom. He wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who desires more that is poor." The person always craving more, always chasing the next thing, always driven by impulse, that person is poor in spirit. But the disciplined person who wants only what serves their purpose, who delays gratification for the sake of something meaningful, that person is rich in spirit. Let me make this concrete. Imagine two people. Person A has no discipline. They eat what they want, when they want. They sleep haphazardly, they don't exercise. They scroll endlessly on their phone. Person B has discipline. They eat healthily, they wake up early, they exercise, they limit their phone use. Now, Person A will say they're more free. They do whatever they want. But are they free? Let's look at their life 6 months later. Person A, heavier, more tired, less focused, more anxious, no progress toward their goals. Person B, healthier, more energized, more focused, more confident, making progress toward their goals. Person A is enslaved by their own lack of discipline. Their impulses are running their life. Person B is free. They're directing their own life. The discipline isn't constraining person B, it's liberating them. Because every small act of discipline builds their self-trust. Every time they do what they said they do, they prove to themselves that they're reliable, that they're not a slave to their impulses, that they can direct their own life. And that accumulated self-trust is the foundation of unshakable confidence. Marcus Aurelius understood this. He was the most powerful person on earth. But he was intensely disciplined. He had routines. He meditated daily. He did his philosophical practice. He studied. Why would the most powerful person be so disciplined? Because he understood that discipline wasn't limiting him. It was what gave him his power. The practice is this. Pick one small area where you currently lack discipline. Maybe you want to exercise more. Maybe you want to stop scrolling so much. Maybe you want to wake up earlier. Pick something small, achievable, and commit to it for 30 days. Do it even when you don't feel like it. Do it especially when you don't feel like it. Because every single time you do what you said you do, even in a small way, you're building a neural pathway of reliability. You're sending a message to yourself, I can trust myself. I can direct my own life. My will matters. And after 30 days, something shifts. You've built momentum. You've built confidence. And that confidence bleeds into every other area of your life. And you realize, I'm not constrained by discipline. I'm liberated by it.
Part 8. Emotional alchemy. Feeling everything without being controlled. Here's the final piece that most people get catastrophically wrong. The Stoic mindset does not mean suppressing emotions. It does not mean becoming a robot. It means something much more powerful and much more honest. Feeling everything while being controlled by nothing. This is nuanced, and it's crucial. The undefeatable person feels fear. They feel grief. They feel anger. They feel disappointment. But they don't let those feelings determine their actions. There's a massive difference. When you feel fear and you let fear determine your actions, you shrink. You avoid, you hide. But when you feel fear and you choose your actions anyway, you grow. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is action in the presence of fear. Seneca said, "The imposition imposed by a man upon himself is greater than the imposition imposed upon him by the world." What he means is, you have the capacity to endure more than you think. The limits you believe you have, many of them are self-imposed. The undefeatable person feels the limit, the fear, the discomfort, the doubt. But they don't accept it as true. They test it. They push against it. They often discover it's smaller than they thought. Epictetus said something that should be tattooed on every person's heart. It is not things themselves that trouble us, but our judgment about things. And we can always manage our judgments. So when a difficult emotion arises, the undefeatable person doesn't suppress it. They observe it. They acknowledge it. They ask, what is this feeling telling me? What do I need to do in the presence of this feeling? And then they act. Let me give you the clearest example. You're about to have a difficult conversation. You feel anxiety rising. Untrained response, suppress it. Pretend it's not there. Or be controlled by it. Cancel the conversation. Avoid the person. The undefeatable response, notice the anxiety, acknowledge it, say to yourself, I'm feeling fear. That's information. It's telling me this conversation matters. I'm going to have the conversation anyway. And you do. And something miraculous happens. The conversation wasn't as scary as the anxiety predicted. And you've just built evidence that you can do hard things. The practice is this. The next time a difficult emotion arises, pause. Don't suppress it. Don't avoid it. Don't let it control you. Instead, observe it. Name it. I'm feeling fear, anger, sadness, shame. Then ask, what do I need to do right now in the presence of this feeling? And then do it. Not because you feel like it, but because it's the right thing to do. And every single time you do this, you're building the undefeatable mindset. Closing. The infinite game. So here's what we've explored today. The undefeatable mindset isn't born. It's built. It's built on understanding what you can control and what you can't. Embracing difficulty as the path to strength. Accepting what you cannot change. Reframing obstacles into opportunities. Connecting to a purpose bigger than yourself. Using discipline to liberate yourself. Feeling everything while being controlled by nothing. These aren't theoretical concepts. These are practices, things you do daily until they become who you are. And here's what happens when you build this mindset. You can't be broken, not because you won't face pain or loss or rejection, but because you've changed your relationship to it. You see obstacles as invitations. You see failure as feedback. You see setback as set up. And with that shift in perspective, everything changes. Your path becomes clear. Your strength becomes evident. Your resilience becomes unshakable. The person you're becoming is already inside you. You don't need to find them. You just need to build them. Drop a comment. What's the one practice from this video you're going to start implementing this week? Subscribe if this resonated, because we're going to keep exploring the ancient wisdom that transforms how you see challenges, pain, and your own potential. And remember, you're already stronger than you think. You're already capable of more than you believe. You just need to prove it to yourself, and that proof comes one disciplined action at a time. The undefeatable mindset isn't something you get. It's something you become. And the becoming starts now.